The sun was slowly dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. It was one of those calm Friday evenings when the entire neighborhood of Silver Oaks seemed to slow down and breathe. Birds chirped from the trees lining the quiet streets, sprinklers hissed across neatly trimmed lawns, and the scent of freshly cut grass still hung in the air. Inside his cozy two-story home at the end of Willow Creek Drive, Marcus Johnson was setting the table for dinner. He had been looking forward to tonight all week. His daughter, Tiana, had promised to stop by after work. Ever since she graduated from the academy and moved closer to the city for her job, she rarely had time to visit. Family dinners had become precious, rare moments for Marcus. Marcus had bought this house 6 years ago, drawn to Silver Oaks for its reputation as a safe, gated community. It was quiet, clean, and peaceful. Most of the neighbors were polite, even if not overly friendly. For Marcus, who worked long hours as an accountant, the community was exactly what he wanted: a place where he could come home, unwind, and leave the worries of the outside world behind. But that evening, neither he nor Tiana could have guessed that their quiet dinner plans would be interrupted, and that what started as an ordinary visit would soon spiral into a moment that the entire community would be talking about for weeks to come. As she drove through the streets of Silver Oaks, Tiana Johnson couldn't help but smile. Her black SUV hummed smoothly along the pavement as she turned down Willow Creek Drive. It had been months since she'd last been home, and though her schedule kept her busy, she always missed this place. It wasn't just the house, it was the feeling of safety, the wide sidewalks, the tall oak trees arching over the streets, and the way the community seemed almost untouched by chaos. Tiana parked in the driveway and stepped out, stretching her legs after the long drive. Dressed casually in her workout leggings and a light gray hoodie, she looked every bit the off-duty professional she was: relaxed, focused, and ready to enjoy a peaceful evening. In her hand, she carried a small bag filled with dessert she'd picked up on the way. She glanced up at the familiar windows of her father's home and smiled, imagining him setting the table and probably humming to himself. It felt good to be back. She locked her SUV and started walking toward the front door. That's when she heard the low hum of a small electric engine behind her. At first, she didn't think much of it. The neighborhood had these little HOA-branded golf carts that circled around to patrol the streets. She'd seen them before when she used to live here. Usually, the drivers waved politely, maybe stopped to chat, and then moved along. But as she took a few more steps, the hum grew louder and slower, as if whoever was driving was deliberately trailing her. Tiana turned slightly, and sure enough, a small white golf cart bearing the Silver Oaks HOA security logo was pulling up. At the wheel sat a middle-aged man she didn't recognize. He wore a navy polo shirt tucked neatly into khaki pants, sunglasses perched firmly on his nose even though the sun was nearly gone. His posture was stiff, and his expression unreadable. She slowed her pace just a little, expecting him to wave or perhaps greet her. But instead, the cart rolled up and came to an abrupt stop, blocking part of the sidewalk. "Evening," she said politely, offering a small nod as she adjusted the dessert bag in her hand. The man didn't return the greeting. He leaned slightly forward in his seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his gaze locked on her. "Can I help you with something?" Tiana asked, maintaining a friendly tone. "You live here?" he asked flatly. Tiana paused for a brief second, slightly taken aback by his tone. "My dad lives here," she replied calmly. "I'm just visiting." "Name?" he asked immediately, his voice firm but not loud. Tiana blinked, surprised by the abruptness. "Johnson. Marcus Johnson. He lives in this house," she said, nodding toward the driveway behind her. The man's jaw tightened. "Never seen you before," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Got some ID on you?" For a moment, Tiana hesitated. She understood the idea of keeping a neighborhood safe, but she also knew this wasn't typical. HOA security officers weren't law enforcement. They didn't have the authority to demand identification, especially from someone standing in her father's driveway. She smiled politely but kept her voice even. I appreciate what you're doing, but I don't think that'll be necessary. I'm headed inside now. She turned to continue walking toward the door. Behind her, the man spoke again, this time louder. Ma'am, I need you to stop right there. The firmness in his voice carried an edge now. Tiana stopped mid-step, partly out of instinct and partly out of caution. She turned back toward him, keeping her posture relaxed even though she felt the tension rising in the air. Sir, is there a problem? She asked, her tone neutral. I don't know if you belong here, he replied. We've had incidents lately. Can't just let anyone walk around. Tiana took a quiet breath, steadying herself. She'd dealt with situations far more intense than this in her line of work, but she also knew appearances mattered. Here, she was just another resident's daughter and to him, a stranger. Like I said, she replied gently, this is my dad's house. I'm visiting him. If you'd like, you can wait here and ask him yourself when I knock on the door. For a second, silence hung between them. The man seemed to weigh her words, his expression tight. Finally, he nodded slightly, though his grip on the steering wheel didn't relax. Fine. Go ahead, he muttered. Tiana gave a polite nod and turned back toward the door. As she walked, though, she could feel his gaze on her back sharp, unblinking, suspicious. Inside the house, Marcus was humming softly to himself, completely unaware of what was happening just outside his door. A few houses down, curtains shifted as a couple of neighbors peeked through their windows, noticing the HOA cart parked unusually close to Marcus's driveway. It wasn't uncommon for the HOA to patrol, but it wasn't common for them to stop someone like this. Silver Oaks was quiet, yes, but also quietly observant. Tiana, meanwhile, reached the front steps and rang the doorbell. She heard her father's footsteps approaching from inside. Just before he opened the door, she glanced back one last time. The security officer was still sitting there, engine idling, sunglasses reflecting the fading light, watching her as though waiting for something. She didn't know it yet, but this was just the start of a night neither she nor her father would ever forget. The front door opened, and Marcus stepped out with a warm smile, ready to welcome his daughter. But the moment he noticed the HOA security cart parked near the sidewalk, his expression shifted slightly. Marcus was used to seeing patrols in the neighborhood, but something about the way the officer sat there still, silent, and watching made him uneasy. Tiana, you made it? Marcus said, pulling her into a quick hug before glancing over her shoulder. Everything okay out here? Tiana kept her tone calm and casual. Yeah, Dad. Just one of the HOA security officers doing his rounds. He wanted to know if I lived here. Marcus raised an eyebrow and turned his attention toward the man in the golf cart. He offered a polite nod and waved. Evening, he said. The officer, whose name tag read Gregory Mills, didn't return the wave. Instead, he sat there stiffly, his sunglasses hiding his eyes even though dusk was setting in. Marcus felt a small knot tighten in his chest, but he didn't want to cause a scene. He stepped slightly forward, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. This is my daughter, he called out, keeping his voice friendly but firm. She's visiting me tonight. Gregory leaned slightly forward in his seat. Haven't seen her around before, he said in a clipped tone. We've had reports about unfamiliar vehicles entering the neighborhood. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand you're doing your job, but this is her home, too. She's welcome here anytime. For a brief moment, it seemed like the explanation might settle things. But instead of driving off, Gregory stepped out of the cart and stood beside it, arms folded tightly across his chest. Tiana, sensing the tension, stepped a little closer to her father. She didn't want the situation to escalate, but she also knew from experience that sometimes calmness was the strongest response. Gregory took a step toward them, his expression serious. "Do you have proof she belongs here?" Marcus blinked, stunned by the question. "Proof," he repeated, his voice steady but laced with disbelief. "This is my daughter. I've lived here 6 years. My name is Marcus Johnson, house number 42. Gregory nodded slightly but didn't move. "I know who you are," he said. "But I still need to confirm. HOA's tightening up security these days." Tiana could feel her father's patience thinning, so she gently placed a hand on his arm. "Dad," she said softly, "it's okay. Let me handle this." Turning toward Gregory, she kept her voice even and professional, a tone she often used in her own work. "Sir, my name is Tiana Johnson. I grew up in this house. My car is parked in the driveway, and if you want, I can give you the license plate number so you can match it against HOA records." For the first time, Gregory hesitated. The offer seemed reasonable, but instead of accepting it, he looked her up and down, as though searching for something that didn't quite fit. "You just don't look familiar," he muttered, almost to himself. Tiana took a quiet breath, reminding herself to stay patient. "I don't live here anymore," she explained calmly. "I work in the city now, but I come back to visit my dad whenever I can." Gregory didn't respond right away. He glanced back at his cart, then at Tiana again, as if weighing whether to push further or let it go. The silence stretched for several seconds, the only sound coming from the faint chirping of crickets in the distance. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice steady but firm. "Listen, Gregory, I appreciate the HOA looking out for us, but this has gone far enough. She's my daughter, and she's staying for dinner. If you have any doubts, you're welcome to call the HOA office right now." Gregory shifted uncomfortably, his stance loosening slightly. It was clear he didn't have an easy comeback. Still, instead of backing off, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket and scribbled something down. "I'll be making a note of this," he said flatly. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite smile. "You do that," he replied, placing a hand on Tiana's back to guide her inside. As they walked up the steps and into the house, Tiana could still feel Gregory's eyes on her. She glanced back once and saw him standing near the cart, writing in his notebook, his posture tense and unyielding. Inside, Marcus closed the door and sighed deeply, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered, setting the dessert bag on the counter. "I've been here 6 years without a single issue, and suddenly they're questioning who comes to my house." Tiana set her bag down and leaned against the counter, folding her arms thoughtfully. "Dad, it's okay," she said gently. "He was doing his job, just maybe a little more aggressively than necessary." Marcus frowned. There's a difference between being cautious and being confrontational. He could have just asked politely and left it at that. Tiana didn't disagree, but she also knew dwelling on Gregory's behavior wouldn't help. Instead, she tried to steer the conversation back to dinner, hoping to put the tension behind them. "Let's not let this ruin the evening," she said with a smile. "I brought that apple crumble you like. You promised to make the tea." That managed to coax a small laugh out of Marcus. All right," he said, shaking his head. "Tea it is." For the next half hour, they settled into an easy rhythm, talking and laughing as though nothing had happened outside. But even as the aroma of dinner filled the kitchen and conversation flowed, Tiana couldn't quite shake the feeling of being watched. Later that evening, Marcus stepped out onto the porch to get some fresh air while Tiana helped clear the dishes. To his surprise, the HOA golf cart was parked across the street, engine off, with Gregory sitting inside, arms folded, watching the house. Marcus narrowed his eyes slightly, a mix of frustration and unease rising in his chest. He walked halfway down the steps and called out, "Gregory, everything all right?" Gregory looked up, his expression unreadable in the fading light. "Just doing my rounds," he replied simply, before turning his attention back to his notepad. Marcus stayed silent for a moment, then gave a short nod and returned inside. He didn't want to cause a scene in front of the neighbors, but it was clear that whatever had happened earlier wasn't over in Gregory's mind. When Marcus told Tiana what he'd seen, she listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. She didn't like to jump to conclusions, but years of training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about Gregory's behavior didn't sit right with her. "He's still out there?" she asked softly. Marcus nodded. "Parked right across the street." Tiana glanced toward the window, her gaze steady. "All right," she said finally, her voice calm but deliberate. "Let's just go about our night. If he's doing his job, he'll move along soon enough." Still, she couldn't ignore the quiet unease growing in the pit of her stomach. As night fell, the soft glow of porch lights lit the sidewalks, and the neighborhood grew quiet again. But outside, Gregory remained a silent presence, his cart still parked across the street, engine humming faintly now and then. Inside, Tiana checked her phone for messages from work while Marcus flipped through the channels on the TV, trying to distract himself. But both of them were aware of the lingering tension. Tiana couldn't shake the sense that something deeper was going on, that Gregory wasn't simply doing his job. She'd encountered people like him before, rule-driven, inflexible, and convinced they were protecting something important. She didn't know yet just how far he was willing to go, but she was already preparing herself to stay calm, stay alert, and handle whatever came next. The night was only beginning, and neither of them knew that the situation outside was about to take a turn they never expected. The soft glow of the porch lights spilled across the driveway as Tiana stood near the window, quietly observing the street outside. The neighborhood was calm and still, yet there was something unsettling about the way Gregory, the HOA security officer, lingered in his cart across the street. It wasn't unusual for the HOA to keep an eye on things, but his persistence was different. He wasn't patrolling. He wasn't moving along. He was just watching. Inside, Marcus noticed his daughter's gaze and joined her by the window. "He's still out there?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Tiana nodded slightly. "Yeah. Same spot. Same posture." Marcus rubbed the back of his neck, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. "I don't understand why he's making such a big deal out of this. You're my daughter. You belong here. It shouldn't be this complicated." Tiana placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her voice calm and measured. "I know, Dad. But sometimes people make assumptions before they understand the full picture. I've dealt with it before. This isn't new." Marcus frowned, his protective instincts flaring. "You shouldn't have to deal with it. Not here. Not in your own home." Tiana gave him a soft smile, trying to ease his worry. "I'm fine," she assured him. "And I'm not going to let it ruin our evening." She spoke confidently, but deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Her instincts, sharpened over years of training and experience, told her that Gregory wasn't ready to let the matter go. An hour later, Marcus and Tiana sat in the living room, sipping tea and talking about lighter things. Marcus told stories about his co-workers and neighbors, while Tiana shared carefully edited versions of her work life, avoiding too much detail about her actual role in federal operations. But despite the warm atmosphere inside, the quiet hum of the golf cart engine outside never really left her mind. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Marcus looked toward the door, puzzled. It was late for a neighborly visit, and most people in Silver Oaks usually called before stopping by. He opened the door to find Gregory standing on the porch, his notepad in one hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm. "Evening," Gregory said curtly, nodding at Marcus. "I need to verify some information." Marcus blinked in surprise. "At this hour?" Gregory's tone didn't soften. "It won't take long." HOA protocol. Tiana stepped into the hallway, her presence calm but commanding. "What information are you trying to verify?" she asked evenly. Gregory glanced at her, then back at Marcus. "Vehicle registration, guest authorization, that sort of thing. We're tightening up security measures after a few recent reports." Marcus crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin. "Gregory, my daughter doesn't need authorization to visit me. I own this house, and she grew up here. This is her home as much as it's mine." For a moment, Gregory hesitated. He seemed to be struggling between following whatever protocol he believed in and facing the reality of the situation. Still, he scribbled something in his notepad and said, "Rules are rules, Mr. Johnson. I'm just doing my job." Tiana stepped forward slightly, her voice calm but assertive. "And we respect that. But you should also understand that there's a line between keeping a community safe and making residents feel unwelcome. My father has been here for 6 years without a single issue. I've been here countless times. I think we can resolve this without unnecessary paperwork." Gregory studied her for a moment, his jaw tightening as though he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. After a brief pause, he gave a short nod. "All right," he said finally. "I'll note it down as cleared for now. But I'll have to submit a report." Marcus exhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay composed. "You do that," he replied calmly. Without another word, Gregory turned and walked back toward his cart, his posture stiff as ever. After closing the door, Marcus let out a frustrated sigh. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "It's like he's looking for trouble where there isn't any." Tiana leaned against the wall, thoughtful. "I don't think he's looking for trouble," she said softly. "I think he's trying too hard to prove himself. Sometimes people in positions like his feel they need to assert authority to be taken seriously." Marcus looked at her, eyebrows raised. "And what happens when they push too far?" Tiana gave him a steady look. "Then you stay calm, no matter what. Escalation never helps." Marcus nodded, taking comfort in her calm presence. The night stretched on, quiet but tense. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus went upstairs to grab an old photo album, hoping to lighten the mood. Tiana remained in the living room, scrolling through her phone while keeping one ear tuned to the outside world. Then she noticed movement through the blinds. Gregory's cart had moved again, this time parked directly across from their driveway, its headlights dimmed but engine still running. He wasn't making rounds anymore. He was observing. Tiana's instincts sharpened. Years of tactical experience taught her to read body language and patterns, and this was no casual patrol. Gregory was fixated. She took a deep breath, centering herself. No panic. No assumptions. Just awareness. When Marcus came back downstairs carrying the album, she gestured subtly toward the window. "He's still out there," she said softly. Marcus peered outside and sighed. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "I think I'm going to call the HOA office tomorrow. This isn't security, it's harassment." Tiana nodded but kept her tone measured. "Let's wait and see what happens tonight. If he's still out there in an hour, then maybe we'll make a call." By 11, the neighborhood had grown silent. Most porch lights were off, and the streets were empty. Gregory's cart was still in the same spot, though. Inside, Marcus dozed lightly on the couch, but Tiana remained awake. She wasn't unsettled, exactly, she'd seen far more stressful situations, but her curiosity about Gregory's intentions kept her alert. Then, without warning, there was a faint sound outside. A door clicked shut. Through the blinds, she saw Gregory step out of his cart and slowly start walking toward the Johnsons' driveway. Tiana's heart rate didn't spike. Instead, she felt a wave of focus settle over her, the kind of clarity she'd been trained to rely on. She walked quietly to the door and opened it just as Gregory reached the base of the driveway. Something I can help you with? She asked calmly. Gregory stopped short, clearly not expecting her to appear so suddenly. He hesitated, glancing around before answering. Just checking the property. Standard procedure. Tiana studied him carefully. At 11 at night, she asked gently, without accusation. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. Just making sure everything's secure. Tiana held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. The property's fine, she said softly but firmly. You've done enough for tonight. There was a pause. Something in her tone, calm, steady, authoritative, seemed to reach him. After a moment, Gregory gave a short nod, turned, and walked back toward his cart without another word. Tiana watched as the cart rolled slowly down the street, disappearing around the corner. She closed the door and leaned against it for a second, letting out a quiet breath. Marcus stirred on the couch and opened his eyes. Everything okay? He asked groggily. Yeah, she said, smiling faintly. Everything's fine. But deep down, she knew this wasn't the end of it. Gregory wasn't convinced. And something told her that the next time he approached, it wouldn't just be about protocol. That night, as she lay awake in her old room, Tiana replayed the events in her mind. She wasn't afraid, far from it. But she was preparing. Because sooner or later, she knew Gregory would make another move. And when he did, she'd be ready. The following morning, the sun rose slowly over Silver Oaks, casting a golden glow across the quiet streets. For most residents, it was just another peaceful Saturday. Children rode their bikes, sprinklers watered perfectly manicured lawns, and joggers waved to one another as they passed. But inside the Johnson household, the mood was far from relaxed. Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of coffee in front of him, his brows knitted together as he scrolled through his phone. Tiana, dressed casually in a pale blue t-shirt and jeans, leaned against the counter, sipping her tea while glancing toward the living room window from time to time. He's still out there, Marcus muttered finally, lowering his phone and looking toward the street. Tiana nodded. I noticed. Gregory's HOA security cart was parked near the corner of the street again. He wasn't moving, wasn't patrolling, just sitting there, notebook in hand. Dad, Tiana said softly, I really think you should let me handle this. Marcus shook his head. You shouldn't have to handle anything. This is our home. You have every right to be here without someone questioning you like this. I know, she said calmly, setting her mug down. But I also know how to manage situations like this without making them worse. Trust me. Marcus hesitated, then finally gave a short nod. All right, he said reluctantly. But if he steps 1 inch onto this property again, I've got it, she assured him gently. A little later, Tiana stepped outside onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass. Across the street, Gregory looked up from his notepad and stiffened slightly when he saw her. She walked down the steps slowly, her movements calm and deliberate, and stopped at the edge of the driveway. Morning, she said, her voice polite but steady. Gregory nodded curtly. Morning. Can we talk for a moment, she asked. He hesitated before stepping out of the cart and walking toward the sidewalk, stopping a few feet away from her. I think we got off on the wrong foot yesterday, she began. I understand that you take your role seriously, and I respect anyone who looks out for the safety of their community. Gregory's posture softened slightly at her words, though his expression remained guarded. But, she continued, her tone even, I also need you to understand that this is my father's home. I grew up here. I belong here, whether you've seen me around or not. When you approach someone like you did last night, it can make people feel singled out. Gregory shifted his weight from one foot to the other. It's nothing personal, he said defensively. We've had reports about unfamiliar vehicles. I'm just following HOA guidelines. I hear you, she said gently. But following guidelines also means balancing safety with respect. My car's registered to me. I'm happy to provide my plate number so you can confirm it with the HOA if that helps. There's no reason for this to turn into something bigger than it needs to be. For a moment, Gregory said nothing, his eyes narrowing slightly as though he was processing her words. Finally, he gave a short nod. I'll note it, he said. But I still have to file an incident report. It's protocol. That's fine, she said calmly. Do what you need to do. Just, let's make sure we handle it the right way. Gregory glanced at her for another beat before returning to his cart and driving off slowly down the street. Marcus stepped outside as she watched him leave. That seemed civil enough, he said cautiously. Tiana nodded but kept her gaze on the disappearing cart. It was, for now. But I don't think he's done. By early afternoon, word of the previous night's interaction had already spread through Silver Oaks. In a close-knit gated community like this, news traveled fast. Neighbors whispered quietly over hedges and at mailboxes, curious about what had happened. Around 3 p.m., the HOA board held an unscheduled meeting at the clubhouse. Marcus wasn't the type to get involved in neighborhood politics, but today he made an exception. Tiana went with him, sitting quietly in the back as her father took a seat among the rows of chairs set up for residents. At the front of the room, Elaine Foster, the HOA president, adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, she began. We've had a few concerns raised about last night's security protocols, and we'd like to address them directly. Gregory sat off to the side, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Elaine continued, we want to ensure that our community remains safe while also respecting the rights of our residents and their guests. We're reviewing reports from last night and will determine if any adjustments to our security approach are necessary. From the audience, a man raised his hand. Are these reports about what happened at Marcus Johnson's house? A low murmur spread through the room. Marcus sat up straighter but remained silent. Elaine nodded carefully. There was an interaction between one of our security officers and a resident's guest, she said diplomatically. We're here to listen and ensure everyone feels heard. Another neighbor, a woman seated 2 rows ahead, turned slightly in her chair. I saw the whole thing, she said. Tiana was just walking up the driveway, and Gregory stopped her like she didn't belong. It didn't look right. Several heads nodded in agreement. Gregory finally spoke, his tone defensive but measured. With all due respect, I'm responsible for keeping this neighborhood safe. I can't just assume everyone belongs here. My job is to ask questions when something seems off. Tiana raised her hand slightly, and Elaine gestured for her to speak. I understand the need for safety, Tiana said, her voice calm and steady. But there's also a responsibility to approach situations with respect and professionalism. I wasn't wandering around the neighborhood, I was walking up my father's driveway. A simple conversation would have cleared everything up. The room fell silent for a moment as her words hung in the air. Finally, Elaine spoke again. Thank you, Miss Johnson. I think this highlights the importance of reviewing how we handle resident verification. We want our security to keep us safe, not make people feel uncomfortable in their own homes. By the end of the meeting, the HOA board promised to revisit their security protocols. But while most neighbors seemed satisfied, Gregory's stiff posture suggested he didn't agree with the outcome. As Tiana and Marcus walked back home, several neighbors stopped them along the way, offering kind words of support. You handled that so gracefully, one older woman said with a smile. I hope this means we'll see some changes. Tiana thanked her politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She'd noticed the look in Gregory's eyes as the meeting ended, a mix of frustration and determination. He didn't seem like someone ready to back down. That evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Tiana sat on the porch, watching the quiet street. The events of the day had drawn attention to what happened, but she suspected the situation wasn't over. Marcus joined her with 2 mugs of tea, passing one to her as he settled into the chair beside her. "You know," he said softly, "I think half the neighborhood's on our side after today." Tiana smiled faintly. "I know. That helps." But she didn't voice the thought lingering in the back of her mind that this wasn't just about one misunderstanding anymore. Gregory had made it personal, even if he didn't realize it. She wasn't afraid, though. If anything, she felt more prepared than ever. Years of training had taught her to stay calm under pressure, to read situations, and to respond thoughtfully. Tonight was peaceful, but deep down, Tiana knew that the next time Gregory confronted her, the conversation would change. Because sooner or later, he'd learn exactly who she was and why trying to intimidate her was never going to work. Sunday morning in Silver Oaks began like any other. The sky was clear, birds chirped softly from the treetops, and the warm sunlight painted the sidewalks in soft golden hues. Children were out with their bicycles, neighbors tended their gardens, and joggers passed by with cheerful waves. From the outside, it looked like a picture-perfect weekend in a quiet gated community. But inside the Johnson household, there was an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Marcus sat at the dining table, flipping through the morning paper without really reading it. Across from him, Tiana was drinking her coffee, staring absently at the steam curling from the mug. Neither of them had forgotten the events of the last 2 days. For Marcus, the entire ordeal still felt surreal. He'd worked hard his entire life to provide a home in a peaceful neighborhood where his family could feel safe. Yet, despite 6 years of living here without issue, his own daughter had been treated like a stranger. Tiana, on the other hand, wasn't angry. She'd learned long ago that frustration only clouded judgment. But she was thoughtful, replaying every interaction in her mind. Gregory, the HOA security officer, wasn't simply following rules. There was something deeper driving his persistence. She'd seen it in his posture, his eyes, and his refusal to let things go. And if there was one thing she'd learned in her career, it was this: people who act out of rigid conviction rarely stop until someone sets clear boundaries. Around mid-morning, Marcus's phone buzzed. It was a message from a neighbor: "You might want to check outside. Gregory's talking to a couple of board members by the clubhouse. Looks like he's showing them notes." Marcus sighed heavily. "He's at it again," he muttered, showing the message to Tiana. She studied the text calmly. "Then it might be time I speak openly," she said. Marcus looked up at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "For 2 days, I've let him think I'm just another resident's daughter," she explained. "I've been patient, respectful, and calm. But sometimes, to resolve situations like this, you have to give people context, the kind that makes them pause and reflect." Marcus frowned slightly. "Tiana, you've kept your job private for a reason. Do you really want to bring it up here?" She gave him a reassuring smile. "I think it's necessary now. Not to embarrass anyone. Not to create conflict. Just to make sure this stops, for good." By noon, Tiana and Marcus walked toward the Silver Oaks clubhouse, where a small group of residents had gathered near the entrance. A few whispered among themselves as they approached, their curious glances following the two of them. Gregory stood with 2 board members, gesturing animatedly with his notepad in hand. His tone wasn't loud, but it was firm. "We need stricter verification policies," he was saying. "If we start letting people walk around unchecked, what's the point of security?" One of the board members, a tall man named Franklin Harris, spotted Marcus and Tiana approaching and stepped forward politely. "Marcus, Tiana," he greeted them with a nod. "We were just discussing yesterday's events." "I figured as much," Marcus replied, his voice steady. Before anyone else could speak, Gregory turned toward them. I filed my report, he said briskly. The HOA will decide how to handle it. Tiana met his gaze calmly. Gregory, she said softly, I'd like to have an honest conversation with you. Right here. No tension. No assumptions. Gregory hesitated, clearly uncertain, but after a brief pause, he gave a small nod. Go ahead. She stepped forward slightly so everyone could hear her, her tone warm yet firm. I respect anyone who takes their job seriously, she began. I understand the importance of keeping a community safe. But for the past 2 days, you've treated me like I don't belong here despite the fact that this is my father's home and the place where I grew up. A few neighbors nodded subtly in agreement. You've watched, questioned, and reported me, she continued. That's your choice. But I think it's only fair you understand who I am before making further judgments. Tiana reached calmly into her bag and pulled out a slim leather wallet. She opened it and held up a small badge and identification card, letting the sunlight catch its edges. My name is Tiana Johnson, she said clearly. I'm a tactical operations commander with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A hush fell over the small crowd. Even the birds seemed quieter for a moment. Gregory blinked, visibly caught off guard. You work for the FBI, he asked, his voice softer now, lacking its usual sharpness. Yes, she said simply. I lead a team trained to handle some of the most high-risk situations in this country. Every day, I work alongside people whose job is to protect lives, uphold the law, and maintain peace. She lowered the badge, her expression gentle but firm. So believe me when I say I understand safety. I understand security. I understand the need for vigilance better than most. But what happened here wasn't about safety, it was about assumptions. And assumptions can create unnecessary tension where there doesn't need to be any. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Franklin cleared his throat softly. I think that makes things very clear, he said, glancing at Gregory. Perhaps it's time we reconsider how we handle resident verification. Gregory's posture shifted. He wasn't defensive anymore, just quiet, his notepad resting loosely in his hand. I didn't know, he said finally. I didn't realize who you were. Tiana smiled faintly, shaking her head. That's exactly the point, Gregory. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect. Everyone walking these streets deserves the benefit of polite conversation before suspicion. Across the small crowd, several residents murmured their agreement. One elderly gentleman stepped forward slightly. She's right, he said firmly. I've lived here for 10 years, and I've never once felt unsafe. We want security, yes, but not at the cost of making our own neighbors feel like outsiders. Elaine, the HOA president, joined in. We'll be reviewing all security procedures immediately, she announced. Our goal is to make this community feel safe, not tense. After the meeting broke up, several neighbors came over to speak with Marcus and Tiana personally. Some apologized for staying silent the past 2 days, while others offered support and gratitude for how calmly Tiana had handled everything. One young couple with 2 children smiled warmly as they approached. Thank you for saying what needed to be said, the mother said. It's easy to forget that security isn't just about fences and gates, it's about trust, too. Tiana nodded, her voice soft. Exactly. When we trust each other, communities are stronger. As the crowd began to thin, Gregory lingered by his cart, staring at the pavement. Tiana walked over to him quietly. I wasn't trying to embarrass you, she said gently. I wanted us to understand each other. Gregory looked up, his expression conflicted but more open than before. I thought I was protecting this place, he admitted. And you are, she said kindly. But protecting people means seeing them first, not just rules on paper. He nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I'll remember that, he said softly. That evening, the Johnson home felt lighter somehow. Marcus sat on the porch with his daughter, the golden glow of sunset washing over the street. "You handled that perfectly," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "I don't know how you stay so calm." Tiana smiled faintly, sipping her tea. "Calmness gives you control," she replied. "And control helps you find solutions." For the first time all weekend, Marcus felt the tightness in his chest ease. The tension that had been shadowing their home finally seemed to lift. Across the street, Gregory's cart rolled slowly down the lane, not stopping, not watching, just continuing on its route like it should have from the start. Silver Oaks was quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This time, it felt earned, like the community had learned something important about empathy, respect, and understanding. Tiana leaned back in her chair, watching the soft glow of porch lights turn on up and down the street. For the first time all weekend, she allowed herself to truly relax. She knew challenges like this weren't unique to Silver Oaks. But today, in this little corner of the world, a small change had begun, one conversation at a time.